So this next section will probably bring back some painful memories from when you studied for the MCAT. Many of these equations are the same as the ones you had to memorize for the physical science portion of the exam. It's my experience that many medical students don't really like learning these equations, but I will say that they are very high yield for Step 1. Because at the end of the day, this allows the Step 1 examiners to really test your basic physiologic understanding. So the better you understand these equations, the better you understand the physiology, and the better you're going to do on test day. So let's take some time to really go over these equations together. The first equation I want to go through is the equation that your change in pressure is equal to your flow times resistance. This looks a lot like Ohm's law that is applied to the flow of electrons through a conductive medium. Remember that as delta V is equal to IR. And these are essentially the same type of things. So you have a change in pressure versus a change in voltage, and then flow and flow here, Q and I, and then you have your resistance. So remember, pressure is a relative term just like voltage. A change in pressure, or a difference in pressure from one place to another, is what drives flow. In natural systems, the pressure gradient drives flow from an area of high pressure to an area of low pressure. Hopefully you can think about this as applying it to medicine and applying it to the human body from the arterial system to the venous system. One of the key components to the generation of this pressure gradient is your total peripheral resistance. Resistance is really what drives this pressure gradient. So now thinking back to the human body, where in the peripheral vascular system is resistance created? The resistance is created in the arterioles, or at the level of the arterioles, which are basically small arteries that precede the capillary beds. So now thinking more about resistance, what variables within the arterioles do we think about that would contribute to overall resistance? Well, remember that resistance is equal to 8 times viscosity, represented by this symbol here, times length over pi r cubed. This is your equation that determines resistance in a vessel, for instance. So the things that we could do to increase resistance in a vessel would be increase the viscosity, we could increase the length of that arteriolar vessel, or we could decrease the radius of the vessel. So now let's go through these one at a time and break them down. So what is viscosity? Viscosity is the intrinsic ability of blood to flow against itself. That's the sort of textbook definition. The intrinsic ability of blood to flow against itself. I mean, at the end of the day, it really is a characteristic of blood at a given time. Viscous blood is thick, gelatinous, poorly mobile. You can think of a viscous liquid like dishwasher gel or hair gel or something. It is thick. It doesn't move well. In the blood, the viscosity, or the sort of gelatinous character of the blood, is determined mostly by the hematocrit. The higher the hematocrit, the higher the red blood cell, the higher the protein content, the higher the viscosity. We see this in situations like polycythemia vera or multiple myeloma, or in situations of severe dehydration when the plasma volume is low and the red blood cell volume is high, the hematocrit is high, and we see a more viscous blood. That is one variable that contributes to resistance. When the blood is more viscous or thick and less mobile, we see an increase in resistance, particularly in the level of the arterioles. In addition to viscosity, we have to think about the radius of the vessel. And it's important to note that the variable that contributes most to the peripheral resistance is the radius. And that makes sense because we see it here mathematically expressed as r to the 4th power. So any small changes in our radius will be amplified to the 4th power and make a huge difference in our peripheral resistance. If the radius of the arteriole goes from, say, 1 millimeter to half a millimeter, the denominator goes from 1 to the 4th power to 0.5 to the 4th power, which is 0.0625. When you have a denominator that small, we're going to see a severe increase in your resistance. So remember that the radius is the most important variable when it comes to resistance in the arterioles. This makes sense when you're playing with a garden hose. You can think about it like that. When you have a garden hose, and you stick your thumb in front of it, you're going to decrease the radius, say in half or 3/4, and as a result, you feel an increased pressure on your thumb. You see a decrease in the volume that comes out of the hose. You're now covering over about half of the hole, so less water can go through. And that's how it really is in the arterioles. When the arterioles decrease in radius, You see an increase in pressure, you see a decrease in volume of flow, and you see an increase in total peripheral resistance.